Welcome to Influential Entrepreneurs, bringing you interviews with elite business leaders and experts, sharing tips and strategies for elevating your business to the next level. Here's your host, Mike Saunders.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Influential Entrepreneurs. This is Mike Saunders, the Authority Positioning Coach. Today we have with us Mike Goldman, who is a leadership team coach and author of The Breakthrough Leadership Team. Mike, welcome to the program.
Mike, thanks so much for having me.
Hey, you're welcome. So I'm excited. I always love talking to people about their book, their creation, because I'm certain that you didn't write that in a weekend. It's been a labor of love, and it's like a culmination of some of the maybe even struggles you've had in your career over the past and refined techniques. So I always love to hear that journey. But start off telling us a little bit about your background and then what led you to your coaching firm.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I've been coaching and consulting for 30 plus years now. Started way back. Spent the first half of my career working for big consulting firms. One is now called Accenture, but they were actually part of a company called Arthur Andersen way back when I worked for them. Then worked for a company called Deloitte. So the first half of my career was big Fortune 500 companies doing typical management consulting. The second half of my career has been more entrepreneurial, my own business, where I work with more smaller and mid-market companies. My focus as a leadership team coach is I work with the CEOs one-on-one and most importantly the leadership team as a group to help them build great companies where people want to, come work and feel fulfilled. So that's what I do, and the idea for the book really came about a year and a half ago. Yes, it did take me a little bit longer than a weekend to write it.
Yeah.
About a year and a half ago was, just realizing, I always thought about what I do is, I help companies grow. And then I woke up one morning and I said, what I really do is I help build great leadership teams. That's what I did. When there was no magic in that, I kind of knew I did that, but I never put it that way. And I'm a big reader. I read about a book a week. So I said, if what I do is build great leadership teams, I probably ought to read a few books on that, because I don't ever remember reading a book specifically about structuring and building a great leadership team. Got on Amazon, could not find one book solely focused on, tons of leadership books, tons of team building books, nothing specifically about building a great leadership team. So I said, crap, I guess I've got to write that book.
Yep.
And that's where the book came from.
Well, that same story you hear on Shark Tank about every other episode. Hey, so what made you start building the whatever widget that you're pitching today? And they're like, well, I needed this. I couldn't find it. So I thought I'm going to go out in the garage and make it. And here we are. So yeah, that you're just doing that in the leadership development world. And to your point, like you said, boy, leadership, that's a pretty vast red ocean, as they say, with a lot of competitors, but the blue ocean might be structuring your leadership team. So let's dive into a couple of the points in the book, because I think that because it's kind of a unique approach to leadership, one of the points that you talk about here in chapter 4, I see on your table of contents, defining the right culture. Tell us a little bit about leadership culture.
Yeah, and it's one point of many in the book, but it's such an important one today that diving deep there makes a lot of sense. And, culture really becomes about the personality of your organization, and it's so important. And the companies that I work with, when we start out and we're talking about their culture, they want to figure out, how do I build a company culture? How do I fix my company culture? And it's actually, although it sounds like the right question, it's absolutely the wrong question to ask. So they start with the wrong premise. The right question to ask is, how do I build the right culture? How do I improve my culture on my leadership team? You can't fix company culture if you've got problems on your leadership team. that's where it starts, and it cascades down. I remember working, with a client a number of years ago, and they were, all complaining about how morale was so bad out there, outside of those conference room doors. Why was morale so bad? We do all these great things for people, but it still feels like morale is bad. And I had them do kind of a secret ballot on a scale of 1 to 10, how they felt. I said, on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely are you to recommend working here to somebody else? And the leadership team averaged a 6.
Wow.
And I said, we're not fixing anything out there until we fix it in here. So it all starts with the leadership team. And there are, and we could, Mike, dive in as much as you want on these things, but for the leadership team, it's not just about how do we create a better culture. You've got to be more specific about that. And I talk about the 3 V's. The first V is values. What are those non-negotiable behaviors that we live and breathe every day? And do we have those defined on the leadership team? Are we living those on the leadership team? So the first V is values. The second V is vision. Do we have a vivid vision, a compelling vision, an exciting vision of the future? And is everybody on the leadership team an evangelist of that vision? And the third V is all about vulnerability, which leads to, trust and honesty on that leadership team. So vulnerability is important. So I'll let you drive, Mike, if you want to dig deeper into each of those V's.
Yeah, great. I mean, you bring up a really good point, and it reminds me of, hey, let's get our leadership team together and create our business plan or marketing plan for this new, initiative or whatever. And you spend 6 months of meetings and back and forth, and you end high-fiving with this new plan, and you're done. Right? It's like, okay, now it's collecting digital. We're not doing anything with it. So it makes me think when you mention values and vision, when you work with a leadership team to help them either create or even optimize their values and vision to solidify their foundation so that you can then start working on that culture, how do you work with them to make sure that that is just part of the ethos of the organization and it's not forgotten and it's not just some plaque on the wall? It literally needs to be, if you stop someone in the hall and go, hey, tell me about our values and vision, they could go, well, it might not be word for word, but they know it. And it's part of their conversation.
Yeah, it's a great question. And values is the one that, frankly, for the first half of my career, I thought that was consulting garbage, right? Yeah. Because most companies come up with a set of values. And like you said, it's a plaque on the wall. I remember working with a client about 8 years ago. And, when I said, we're going to work on core values, and the head of HR said, oh my God, we could save a lot of time. We already have these. She ran out in the hallway, literally took the plaque off the wall and said, we have these. I took it from her. I put it with the words facing the wall. So the leadership,
tell me.
This is the leadership team. And I said, tell me what the core values are. And they were like, I think there's one about innovation. They don't even know what they were.
Yep.
So when you create, and I do work with the leadership team to create those values, because the ones they typically have are just nice marketing words that mean nothing.
That they swiped and adapted from some other thing they found online, probably.
Exactly. And by the way, your values don't have to make you unique. It may be okay to steal them from somebody else if they work for you.
Yep.
But I run my clients through there's an exercise that I run them through to figure out what those values are. And they're not aspirational. They're what's best and right and most noble about who they are today. So they're real, and they've got to be real because they're non-negotiable. And what I do is I run them through 3 tests to make sure they're real. Number one, most important test, and most values fail this test so they don't become values, is I say, are you willing, in fact, are you committed to firing anyone? Your best salesperson, the CEO. Are you committed to firing anyone that blatantly and repeatedly violates that value? That's a biggie. And they'll go, oh, well, we wouldn't fire anyone. Well, then it's not a value.
Yeah, it's like a should have, but not a must have.
Yeah, and what it becomes is an excuse to fire people you don't like that aren't doing a good job. But man, you're not going to hold your top salesperson to that value because they're bringing in a lot of money. Well, then it's not a value. So number one, is it a fireable offense? That's the first test. Second test is, are you willing to take a financial hit to uphold that value? If you have a value that says we treat everyone like grandma, right? If you wouldn't say it to your grandmother, you're not going to say it to each other. We treat everyone with incredible respect. And you've got a client that's sending you a lot of money every week, but is treating your people like garbage. They're cursing people out on the phone. They're treating them with a lack of respect. And you've got someone comes to you, wait, I thought we had respect was a value. We treat everyone like we treat grandma. That's a value. And yet you're allowing this customer to treat me this way. Yeah, but they're bringing us a lot of money.
Yeah.
Okay, then it's not a value.
Yeah.
So number one, is it a fireable offense? Number two, are you willing to take a financial hit? Number three is it alive in the organization today? Because again, if it's non-negotiable and it's a fireable offense, it can't be aspirational, or you'd have to fire half the company tomorrow. So those are things that make them real. And then you've got to say, once we understand, these are really our values, now you've got to live them. And it's not just a matter of putting them on a T-shirt or putting them on a plaque on the wall. Is it part of your hiring process? Is it part of your performance evaluation and planning process? When you give informal feedback, are you relating that feedback to a value? Are you saying great job in that meeting? Or are you saying great job, that was an incredible example of our collaboration core value? Or, hey, the way you acted on this project, I got to tell you, you really, you violated our respect core value, a whole bunch of times, and that's a big problem. You've got to make it real for folks so it's not just a plaque on the wall.
Well, and it kind of reminds me of like the medical TV shows we see where, they'll do like M&M, where it's like something happens and all the doctors get in the room and they're like, okay, here's what happened. What could we have done different? How can we learn from this? And I think that's in some cases what needs to happen in an organization, but it's not like a finger pointing and shaming of someone. And I thought of this too about the plaque on the wall. It could be something as simple as this, and I know this is not groundbreaking, but I have a client that does like $18 million a year in business in the environmental services, and they've got their mission and vision and values on their wall, but every quarter in their weekly Monday afternoon status meetings where everyone's there giving updates, every quarter they'll go, okay, let's grab our, Tom, I want you to read our mission. Okay, Betty, I want you to read the value, and then they talk about things. So I think that how can you make it, first and foremost on your mind? Quarterly at least is better than never. So how are some ways that an organization that you work would advise to make sure that once you've created them really becomes part of the organization and on the forefront of their mind?
One of the best ways to do it is to tell stories.
Yeah.
Is at the beginning of your weekly meeting or your monthly meeting or your town hall, is to tell stories. And I wouldn't suggest, some companies, we're going to do an employee of the month, and employee of the month kind of stuff, even if you relate it back to values, let's be honest, if you were truly giving an employee of the month, the same 2 or 3 employees would win it every month.
Yep.
And what winds up happening, it becomes, who didn't we give it to yet? Who do we need to make feel good? So it's not about awards. It's about telling stories. And those stories should not just be told by the CEO, although that's great, and the CEO really does own the culture. It's not something you delegate to HR. The CEO owns it, so they should be telling those stories. But the story should also come from everybody else, all of the team members saying, hey, I got to tell you, Susan, was an amazing example of living the core values last week when I was out because my mother was sick and she took care of my clients and she really jumped in. It's about stories. And again, more than anything, it's about that informal feedback, the pats on the back, the kicks in the butt, relate them back to the values and relate them back. We haven't talked about vision much yet, but relate them back to the vision. And when I say vision, I don't mean, vision is, again, it's not this beautiful, plaque on the wall with the sentence of, we will be number one in all of our markets and our shareholder value will blah, 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 you'd throw up all over the place. The vision is kind of, a vivid vision of 3 years out, right? And it goes further out than that. There's your big, hairy, audacious goal to 30 years out. But this vivid vision of here's what the world is going to look like. Here's our purpose as an organization.
Something that would draw you toward that.
Yeah, what you're going to do with your vision, and the values work to some degree in this way too, your vision should attract the right employees, the right customers, the right vendors to you. If someone doesn't believe in your vision, either they don't believe in your core purpose, which is your why, or they don't believe in your long-term flag on the mountain, big, hairy, audacious goal, or they don't believe in your 3-year, here's where we're going to be 3 years from now. If they don't believe in any of that stuff, that doesn't make them bad people. Just like if they're not living the core values, it doesn't make them bad people, but it makes them a bad fit for your organization, and that's fine. You're going to repel those people who don't believe what you believe. That's fine. But you need to have from, again, values is the first B, second B is vision. Your leadership team not only needs to be part of creating that vision, they not only need to understand that vision, they need to be evangelists of that vision. And especially now with all the craziness going on, people tend to be heads down on that struggle to survive. How do I get through the day? How do I get through the week? Maybe the company's having challenges. Maybe they're having challenges in their family or with health or whatever it is. People have a tendency to have their heads down, and they're focused on what they don't want. They're focused on what if all of these bad things, and that causes stress and overwhelm and frustration and maybe even depression. And as a leader, you need to be an evangelist of a future you want to focus on, not focusing on what you don't want, focusing on what you want and helping your team to pick their heads up and say, hey, I know today's tough. I know this year has been tough, but let's not forget why we're doing this. And let's not forget of this vision for the future, which hasn't gone away. The way we get there might change. It may take us a little bit longer than we thought, but we've got this vision of the future, and we've got this reason why we do what we do and all these people we want to impact. Let's not forget that. And all of a sudden people can pick their head up and focus on what they want. So that vision is critically important.
It is. And, you said something about focus on the positive, and that sounds so self-improvement, personal development, but it's so true. And in fact, last night I was doing a presentation for a small group of students at our church, and I said, I made this exact point. I said that it's been said that what you resist persists. So it's the opposite of thinking on the positive. If you're like, look at this wrong thing and we need to avoid it, we don't want to do this anymore. Now that doesn't mean you never mention it, because you need to, but if you focus on it and you dwell on it and you're obsessed about it, it just keeps on going. So you need to touch on it and go, hey, here's when you need to avoid it. But look at what will happen. Look at this vision forward of how when we get past this hump, what it's going to be like. And I think that's a really, really big piece that you made there about vision. Let's move on to vulnerability, because I think that can be something quite interesting where it's like, hold up, we got this great value and vision, and we're going to paint our organization as, the next thing's best things to slice bread. And then all of a sudden vulnerability means, wait, we want to talk about something that might not be a wonderful reflection or a mistake we made, or, a flaw or a fly in the ointment, but that really encourages authenticity and transparency. So how does that tie in?
Yeah, vulnerability is kind of a painful word, right? None of us, when you hear about vulnerability, like, ooh, I don't want that. That sounds kind of painful. But it's so important. And again, I'll relate it to what's going on today. It is so easy. Well, not easy, but it feels so natural. It feels so right as a leader, part of that leadership team or a leader of other people. It feels so right to put that superhero cape on and say, I've got to be strong for everyone else. So I'm going to, everything's okay and everything's fine and I'm Mr. Positive and that's all wonderful. The problem is if you have that superhero cape on and you can do no wrong, everything's great, even in this crazy environment, then your peers and your team that works for you, they are not going to feel comfortable being vulnerable with you if you're not vulnerable with them.
Yeah.
They're going to hide that stuff because they're going to think if they are stressed or overwhelmed or depressed or they're getting Zoom fatigue or whatever it is, they're going to feel like they can't or they don't want to share that because it makes them less than. Now, I'm not saying as a leader you ought to take your webcam and zoom in on you curled up like a baby crying in the corner because you don't know how to deal with stuff. No, we're not going to go that far, but you need, that vulnerability, being a real person, taking that superhero cape off and saying, hey, I don't know how to do this. Hey, I need help. Hey, I screwed up and I apologize. Hey,
Yeah.
you know this better than I do. Could we jump on a call? By you showing that vulnerability, you're building trust, and it's actually this kind of vulnerability loop of as you're more vulnerability and trusting, people share more with you, and you're going to share more with them, and the walls come down. It's such an important part of culture, and in fact, if you've read Patrick Lencioni, 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, which has been on the business bestseller list for about 1,000 years now, the foundational dysfunction of any team is a lack of trust. And when he talks about trust, it's not task-based trust. It's not, can I trust you to get the job done? He's talking about vulnerability-based trust.
Yeah. That's huge. Well, I think that we could probably go on about another 2.5 hours just on the 3 V's, and that's just one piece of your book.
Let's do it. I'll clear my schedule. Let's do it.
Yeah, I know, right? So why don't we wrap up with let our listeners know how they can reach out, connect with you, and also pick up a copy of your new book?
Yeah, so the book is available on Amazon. It's called Breakthrough Leadership Team. Available in Kindle paperback. And if you like my New York, New Jersey accent and you want to hear me more, you can buy the Audible version. So that's out on Amazon. My website is mike-goldman.com. And what I want to, offer your listeners as well is if you go to yet another website, breakthroughleadershipteam.com, you'll find some information about the book, but most importantly, you'll find a link to something called the Breakthrough Leadership Team Assessment. And that's a free assessment you can take. The 3 V's we just talked about in culture is one part of the assessment, but the assessment covers mastering self-leadership and finding the right people and how you structure your team and how you execute, how you learn and develop as a team. Culture is just one of 6 key areas. But if you want to assess how your team is doing and where your opportunities areas are, go to breakthroughleadershipteam.com and you can take that assessment.
Well, I will make sure to include that into the show notes. And if you liked hearing about what Mike had to say about leadership and teams and his book, I encourage you to pick it up, take that assessment. If you like this podcast, this episode, or the show in general, I would appreciate going to ratethispodcast.com/influential and give a review. That would help me out, and I appreciate that. And Mike, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Mike, thank you very much. It was great.
You've been listening to Influential Entrepreneurs with Mike Saunders. To learn more about the resources mentioned on today's show or listen to past episodes, visit www.influentialentrepreneurssradio.com.